don't really talk about shame. Once I learned what shame resilience is, that I have to notice it, I have to identify it, I have to reality check it, and I have to name it, that is when I said I will start using the word. And if it's uncomfortable, I get it, it's uncomfortable. But if we don't get comfortable with naming it, we will never be able to get to the root cause that having shame leads us to. Let me step back for just a minute and kind of explain what shame is, right? So shame is really two narratives: not enough, not good enough, not smart enough, not strong enough, I don't provide enough, I'm not a good enough husband, I'm not a good enough parent, I'm not a good enough wife, like whatever that I'm not good enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm too fat, right? Like all of these, I'm not pretty enough. Like men and women have these unbelievable shame narratives. So the first message is I'm not enough. And if you can get past the I'm not enough, and this is all Brené's work, right? If you can get past the I'm not enough, the second message you get is, who do you think you are? Like, who do you think you are, Josh, to start a podcast? Who do you think you are to share your opinions? Who do you think you are, DeDe, to get up on stage and tell people how to lead? Who do you think you are, DeDe? You're only a public affairs officer. No one's going to want to listen to what you think about leadership, right? Like this is what we tell ourselves, and we step into these spaces to do hard things. We first say like, there's no way I can do this. I'm not enough. And then if we can get past that, we go like, who do you think you are? A little too big for your britches there, honey. Get back in line, right? Then, so we first got to know what shame is. Those are the narratives. 2, we all have it. We all experience shame on a probably pretty regular basis. And then 3, the less we talk about it, the more control it has over us. Shame is I want you to hear this for a second. Shame is the highest correlated emotion with aggression, bullying, violence, drug addiction, alcoholism, and suicide.
Wow.
It's the highest.
More of all that.
Yeah, it's the highest correlated emotion. The number one shame trigger at work, irrelevance. And so we are perpetuating shame when we do things like, you're just a public affairs officer, stay in that box. We do things like perpetuate shame when we teach people they have to hustle for their worth. But here's what I really want you to hear. Shame is actually, it feels the same for all of us. It feels like some of us, like when we think about when you're about to get into it, like you're about to rear end someone. Unfortunately, this happens to me a lot because I'm a horrible driver and I'm never focusing. So I'm always like looking up and I'm like, slam on the brakes, right? You know that moment when you slam on the brakes and you can feel your body flush? Like sometimes your hands get sweaty, you get tunnel vision, your armpits sweat. I get tunnel vision. I get like this, I can feel this tingling in my chest. That is actually a shame response, because shame, we actually respond to shame the exact same way we respond to trauma. And so shame feels like that. The narrative is I'm not enough. Who do you think you are? It physically feels like trauma. And it's actually categorized by gender. So the shame narrative for women is be perfect, look perfect, act perfect. The shame narrative for men is don't be weak.
Don't be weak. Wow.
Don't be weak. Think about how often in your life as a guy, you were conditioned, like, don't be weak, like man up, get back in there. Yeah. Guys don't cry. Like you big wussy with a different word, right? Like,
yeah, it can be brutal.
That's the shame narrative that men hear. Now, think about the problem we have in the military with suicide. It's a predominantly male culture who are all embedded with this shame narrative of don't be weak. And then we say, get help. Like, get help implies you're not strong enough to handle it on your own, which is completely contrary to the shame message most men have been getting their entire lives. So how do we get more aware of the shame narrative that men have been hearing their entire lives, as we also try to convince them it's not weak to get help, that it is strong to seek support, right? Like we've got to get really clear on our messaging and on our and leaders who can really understand why that is such a struggle for people, that competing narrative. Anyway, so that's what shame is. Shame resilience. And by the way, again, I want to give credit. This is all Brené Brown's work. And if you're interested in shame, she's got a great TED Talk out there on shame. The Power of Vulnerability TED Talk is certainly watched more, which tells you something about our culture, right? Like we're terrified of digging into the shame, but the shame TED Talk is amazing. And so shame resilience is being able to notice shame, identify shame, reality checking the messages of that I'm not enough, and then actually naming it. So you said at the very beginning, like, oh, we don't really talk, like just we were just talking just now, like we don't really talk about shame. Once I learned what shame resilience is, that I have to notice it, I have to identify it, I have to reality check it, and I have to name it. That is when I said I will start using the word whenever, like it's the word and I'm going to use it. And if it's uncomfortable, I get it, it's uncomfortable. But if we don't get comfortable with naming it, we will never be able to get to the root cause that having shame leads us to.
Yeah, I love that I'm asking you this stuff too, because I'm learning like right as we're talking now, because like I've had horrible negative self-talk, like brutal. I almost didn't start this podcast. It's funny you use that as an example because I had that negative self-talk. Like I listened to another, like a peer of mine's podcast. I thought he absolutely crushed it. And I thought, like, who am I to like, look what he's doing. Like, I can't do that. Like, why would I even try this? And I almost didn't do it because of that. And it's crazy to think that like we could limit ourselves and hold ourselves back like that. So the negative self-talk is brutal. I mean, you can destroy yourself from within with that negative self-talk. You could create narratives that aren't even real. You know, it's just your distorted view of things. And yeah, I think we've all been down that path and it's not fun. And I think the more, you know, we can learn about how to recognize that and stop it from happening, I think that's huge. Like I'm trying to learn that and bring that to my work center. Let's go.
You know, what's funny is I actually have a presentation that I deliver on, and it focuses on connection, and it talks specifically about connection and as the product of empathy. But that empathy, that connection is actually destroyed, right? It's destroyed by shame. And empathy is like the fast track to connection. And so we have to understand empathy, shame, and vulnerability as the means how we navigate those two emotions. And I'm so excited because I go out and I speak about leadership in general, mostly about like, who are we as leaders? What's that inner work? Shape that inside space so that we can connect socially on the outside and lead, you know, from an outside perspective. But the second one is really talking about these emotions, but how do we as leaders get really comfortable with that language? And that one seems to be the one that most people right now are requesting more. Like people really do want to understand, how do we change some of the things we're dealing with? And if you want to talk about not just the Air Force, but so many of the challenges we're seeing in our world right now, whether it's mental health rates rising, whether it's what we've been dealing with COVID and the uncertainty of COVID, whether it's the racial injustice and racial tensions we're trying to address in our society right now. So much of these things, toxic leadership, not just in the military, in culture, so many of these things have shame at the root. And having honest conversations, like people want to know how to have conversations to really navigate those spaces.
Yeah, we recently stood up a diversity and inclusion committee in our med group. And there was an airman who was really interested in that and being a part of that. And I could tell he was hesitant about it. But during the first like Zoom call we did, I encouraged him to join in with me. We both dialed in. We both spoke on experiences. And I swear at the end of that, we were just fired up. Like just being able to be in that safe space and like confront things that like we don't confront like tough things. Like we avoid it, as a matter of fact. So to take that time, like with our peers, and to like get our thoughts and stories out there, and like to do it side by side with him, and to like have him be comfortable enough to like share like his own journey, it was heartwarming. It was very, very heartwarming. And like I could see the progress like unfold with this meeting, just this one meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to say thank you. So one, thank you for not listening to the narrative in your head about not starting the podcast, because you are changing lives by sharing your story. So thank you. And then two, thank you for having those kinds of conversations, because I think so many, and I wouldn't just say airmen, I think so many people are looking to people who can show them how to do it. So thank you very much for that. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. DeDe, what? You're proud of me? Oh, dang. I can do anything now.